Hey, it's Mr. Norton. We're going to have another lecture here when we're moving through our series on economic systems. And for the one we're going to focus on today is going to be market economic systems. Another thing to make sure that we reference again is that market economic systems, just like we had the case with traditional and command, pure versions of these do not exist, though we can see economic systems within the world that we live in today that are heavily influenced by market economic systems. The one that you live in, if you live in the United States, is one that is heavily influenced by market economic systems. But as we've talked about before, we can see aspects of traditional and specifically command within our country's economic system that we have today. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is that we need to remember is that basically both command and traditional have ways in which they control what goes on within the economy. And with tradition, remember, everything's based off tradition. Things don't really change. Everything's kind of locked into place, so there's no real freedom to move about. With command, in the pure version, you have people basically have their jobs predetermined for them, their money predetermined for them. The government makes all their decisions for them. In a market economic system, that's not to say that a government doesn't exist, because it does, but in this case, the government pretty much just doesn't get in your way. They do have some things where they take roles like protecting private property rights. That includes like intellectual properties too, which we'll get to in a moment. But for the most part, we have a hands-off, most commonly referred to as laissez-faire approach. So the government just pretty much has this idea that the market will basically take care of itself. So the focuses of market economies as we mentioned, is going to be on private ownership and private property. Again, remember back to command, there is no private property or private ownership. The government owns everything. So for the most part, they're talking about how people will take care of it because of self-interest in the market. Because with the producers are all about making profit. So they're going to make things specifically that consumers are going to want and things that are needed. So the government doesn't have to get involved in making those decisions for those parties because they know that it'll be taken care of anyways. Basically, the market is going to take care of itself. Now, what is the market? The market is anywhere, any place that something can be sold. That could be something like eBay. That can be your store, the gas station down on the corner. That could be Amazon. That could be, technically, if we're talking about illegal deals, that means like a trade between two people. Not that trading between two people is illegal. I think you know what I'm talking about, though. But those would be considered markets, though. As there are 5 features of a market economy. We're going to kind of go through each 5 here. It's going to be private property, limited government involvement, voluntary exchange in the market, competition and consumer sovereignty, and specialization in markets. Each of these you don't find any of these in our other economic systems with traditional and command. Okay, so private property is pretty easy. That means that you own it. So basically, the government does create laws that allows for people to have private property. So they're enforced, whether that be like private property for land or that might be things that you actually own. So some of the laws that get involved in that too become things like intellectual property rights. So kind of going with private property is basically if people don't trust that the things are actually theirs, then they probably aren't going to actually go ahead and purchase those goods and services. But the same thing too if we talk about the producer portion. Like if we're going to reference here with the intellectual property. So if we end up with a case where I'm creating a book or a song or a movie and I know that people can basically steal those intellectual properties and then make money off of them, what ends up happening is that people aren't inspired to go out and make those. So like in the case of like the bootleg DVD person, that person is making illegal copies of that movie and selling it. Now, if you bought that movie from a store like Amazon or, well, not a store, that's like Best Buy, or you ordered it from Amazon, the person who actually made that movie and put it together gets the money that they're supposed to. But with a bootleg DVD, that doesn't happen. So that's part of why that's considered illegal, because the people who are supposed to be receiving money from that are not. And so that's why you end up having things like copyright laws. If you don't know what a patent is basically that means that you invent something. And so people invent things because they want to make money off of it for the most part. And so if you didn't have a patent on it, I could basically come in, take your idea, and completely steal it. Now, I know you're probably thinking that there are, competition versions of it, like, There are all these different types of computers, there's all these different types of TVs, there's all these different types of, well, basically anything. And that's true, but you don't have it exactly the same, though, either. So if you did, that would be basically trying to, well, basically stealing. There are companies who have lawsuits against each other all the time. Like the Titleist golf ball company is constantly filing lawsuits against some of the competitors in their market because they think that they are accusing them through the lawsuit of basically stealing their ideas and their design for their golf balls. All right. So limited government involvement is basically they just stay out of the way. It's called laissez-faire, as we mentioned earlier. And again, this is a pretty straightforward concept. Basically, the producers will create things that consumers want, and so therefore there's no need for government involvement. Because if you're a smart business person, you don't do things like make things that people surely won't want. Now, of course, there are businesses that make things that people don't want, but in the beginnings, they didn't think that that was going to be the case. So people just, that goes back to kind of where we were at with how do producers get affected by scarcity. It's because you have to produce things that consumers will want, otherwise you'll be out of business. Voluntary exchange in the market, basically this is where two people, the producer and the consumer, have to agree that what they are giving up is worth what they're getting in exchange. So if I go to the store, I want to get a pop. Okay, so it doesn't matter what it is. I'm believing that the money that I'm giving up is worth what I'm getting in exchange for it. So the pop is worth what, I don't know, what is it, like $1.60 or something like that. And the producer, the pop, well, in this case, it's going to be the store owner. The store owner believes that it's worth him to give up his product to get the $1.60 in exchange for me. I don't have to do that. It's voluntary. I can go somewhere else. That's kind of where our next one comes in to play with consumer sovereignty too, is that I don't have to purchase things I don't want. Okay, it has to be voluntary. And even if you're like, well, I have to buy this, you don't technically have to buy it. No one's forcing you to buy it. You could try and go somewhere else if you wanted to. And if there were no one else selling pop in the world, you could choose not to end up buying from that person. Voluntary exchange is all about you believe that you are getting something worth what you're giving up. Okay. So again, with competition and consumer sovereignty, basically, market economic systems want to have two or more producers creating similar things, and what that does is it creates competition. Now, what that does for the consumer is it benefits you in two ways. Is you have ways in which companies will try and drive down prices in order to gain your business. So, of course, you're going to benefit from that because things are cheaper. Now, there are certain things out there that they don't become cheaper through competition. Traditionally, video game systems is the example I love to use, is they're usually the exact same price. So then how will those companies try and get you to basically buy from them? Well, the price isn't going to change, so in this case they try and one-up each other in terms of the quality of the product you have. So competition benefits the consumer in two ways. One, through driving down prices when possible, and two, through trying to get better and improved products. Now with consumer sovereignty, again, consumers have the choice that they can buy from whoever they want. And because producers know that, they have to basically create products that people want and that they're basically willing to spend their money on. Okay. Okay. The last thing to talk about is specialization in markets. The specialization in markets, remember, this is different than command and this is different than traditional, because in command the government basically chose what you're going to be doing, how much you're going to get paid. In traditional, that was basically determined by what tradition was. I mean, traditional, everything seems like tradition is the answer, right? But with specialization, this allows you to concentrate on efforts in which you have an advantage on. Like if you go ahead and, like for me, I'm a teacher. That's an example of specialization. The construction worker, that's a specialization. The doctor, I don't have to be self-sufficient like I would in traditional. Like remember with traditional, like the family or the community has to produce and do everything for themselves. In this case, I go to work and I get paid for teaching. And then I trade the money I basically trade my services for money. That's what I get from Chandler Park. Okay. And then I take that money and I trade it for other things. I trade it for groceries. I trade it for heat in my house. I trade it for the technology that I'm working on right now. I trade it for my car, my gas, everything else. I don't have to be self-sufficient. Like, I can't make a car. So that would, like, if I were living in traditional economic system, technically I think I'd have to make one, right? So basically, specialization allows you to pick what you feel you're best at and go ahead and try and make money off it. So that's pretty much it. Wasn't a real long one, and it's pretty simple and straightforward. So the next topic we're going to focus on is for economic systems is going to be the mixed economic system, which is, we've already talked about traditional, command, and market. Basically, this is going to be the combination of all three.